Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Australian workers are feeling pretty overwhelmed right now. According to Gartner's Global Talent Monitor, Australian employees are feeling uneasy about the future of work and their well-being. It's a pretty grim snapshot of the local labour force, so I wanted to find out why confidence has taken such a hit and whether there's any positivity ahead. Aaron McEwan is Vice President of Research and Advisory for Gartner's HR practice. Aaron, welcome to Fear and Greed.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So Australian employees have reported their lowest ever rates of financial and physical wellness. Just how low is it and why?
Well, it's at record low levels. So when we look at overall wellness, which includes mental wellness, physical wellness, and financial wellness, it's currently sitting at only 31.1% of the Australian, working population that report high levels of well-being. So that's actually the lowest we've ever seen it, and it's a fairly sharp decline even from the previous month. So back in December, things were looking a little better. Unfortunately, as we find ourselves here in quarter one of this year, they're even lower.
So what's the reason? Why is that happening?
Well, part of it is predictable. So epidemiologists often refer to a fourth wave of a pandemic, and I don't want that to be confused with another wave of COVID, for example, but rather that pandemics tend to happen in phases. So the first phase is kind of the direct impact on health of the population due to the virus itself. And then the second component is related to the kind of flow-on impacts of that. So the impact on the healthcare system as it orients to the first wave. Third wave is the untreated chronic illnesses that just end up being overlooked as the health system is kind of overwhelmed. But the fourth wave or phase is what's commonly referred to as psychological injury. So this is all of the psychosocial impacts of that kind of accumulated trauma, the deaths and sickness that people have experienced, but also the economic trauma that comes with pandemics. So it looks as though we are well into that fourth phase. And as a result, things like mental health and overall mental wellness are being impacted really significantly, but so too is physical wellness and financial wellness. And of course, all of this is happening at a period where we're experiencing inflationary pressures and rising interest rates. So, it's a challenging time for employees. They're feeling fatigued and burnt out and pretty stressed.
I suppose the flip side to it, when as you were talking then, I kind of understand all that. Having said that, you can get another job if you want to. I mean, unemployment's 3.5%. So it's not like people can't change jobs, or am I being a little too harsh?
No, I don't think you're being harsh. I mean, our data certainly points to a pretty buoyant, what we would call confidence in the job market. So that's still at relatively record highs. It's declining a little bit. So people's, Australian employees' perceptions of the availability of jobs are pretty high. But there's also some data that suggest that those people who did move during, the Great Resignation, and I'm putting inverted commas around that, there are reports of some regret. So people haven't necessarily found that the grass is greener on the other side, so to speak. So whilst there's lots of opportunity, I think employees are certainly feeling that sense of being burnt out. So I think many of them probably don't want to jump out of the frying pan into the fire, so to speak.
Okay. I mean, it mustn't be great for productivity either. I know the Reserve Bank Governor, Philip Lowe, in the past few days has spoken quite a bit about the need to improve productivity, get more out of each unit of input.
Yeah.
When people aren't feeling great, though, that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does impact on things like discretionary effort, so employees' willingness to go above and beyond. However, we're not seeing particularly low levels of discretionary effort compared to other periods. Some people have concerns around the concept of quiet quitting, so this is people kind of just putting in the bare minimum, and I'm sure that will flow through to productivity. But I think a more important point that needs to be made is that in a world that's kind of dominated by knowledge work, which is becoming more complex and more human over time, particularly with, the impact of automation and, ChatGPT and generative AI get a pretty big share of the kind of focus of that at the moment. But I'm not sure that productivity is really the best measure when you're dealing with complex knowledge work. To produce the type of outputs that knowledge work requires, people need to be well rested and they need to be in a good place to think through those complex issues. So, yes, there is a productivity decline when we see such high levels of stress and mental health problems. But it's not really inputs and outputs that we should be measuring. It gets much better to the quality of that output. So, yes, I do think there's a linkage between productivity and these declines in wellness that we've seen. But I think the solution to fixing that is a little bit more complex.
Okay. Now, the Global Talent Monitor, which came, the most recent Gartner Global Talent Monitor, talked about 3 drivers of attrition in Australian workplaces being manager quality, respect, and people management. Money doesn't really come into it till number 4. I mean, what's that telling us?
It tells us a pretty consistent story. So Australia differs from the rest of the world in that compensation is typically sitting, in the top 5, but generally not in the top 3. It's actually number 1 around most of the rest of the world. So there is a difference there. But what it definitely points to is that Australian workers seem to value their lifestyle, their flexibility, and their autonomy around work really highly. So the reason why manager quality tends to sit up there pretty high is usually because a person's manager is the key determinant of the first one, which is location. So location is really pointing to, it's not, having an attractive office in the CBD that you can go to, for example. It's more, do I have autonomy over where I work, when I work, and how much work I do? And so this is really pointing to this kind of hybrid work emerging as the most preferred model for employees. But what they recognize is that the degree to which their manager respects them and encourages that access to autonomy and flexibility ultimately determines what their experience at work is. So no kind of surprise here that employees are leaving managers that don't do a very good job around that.
Stay with me, Aaron. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Aaron McEwan, Vice President of Research and Advisory for Gartner's HR practice. Respect is another one. I mean, it's all interlinked. I get that. But respect is such an important part of the workplace, it seems. Anywhere I've worked, not just managers respecting employees, but also individuals respecting each other, no matter what they do.
Yeah. So this gets to something that's been really one of the more profound shifts that we saw come through the pandemic. To sum it up as simply as I can, workers want to be seen as human beings, not workers, right? And so this notion of respect has really risen up the ranks of reasons why people will leave a company, but also why they will join a new one. And it's really got to do with, are they treated and seen as a human being, or are they seen as a means to production? So that kind of gets to my earlier point around productivity is not really the way that employees want to be seen in terms of the value that they add to an organization. So that those notions of flexibility and autonomy become really important to employees in this kind of post-COVID or post-pandemic environment.
Do we ever go back to how it was? And is this a phase we're going through? Like where are we going to be in 2 or 3 years' time?
I definitely don't think there's any going back to. Now, that's despite, some of the, desires that we see from senior leadership around the country. There is a strong kind of desire to go back to that pre-pandemic world. The trends that we've seen didn't start with the pandemic. They actually started a long time before it, but arguably the pandemic accelerated a lot of these things. So I think we're well and truly past the point of no return when it comes to that.
So the world is different. It probably means that managers and companies have to learn very, very quickly about how to be managers and look after their people if they want to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's kind of ironic. Prior to the pandemic, one of the predictions that we had at Gartner was that, within the next 6 to 7 years, and this was back in 2019, about 86 to 87% of the tasks that managers performed would be automated. So we're still on track to achieve that. And in fact, with the emergence of generative AI, that future might come a little bit quicker. So in a kind of ironic twist, the pandemic saved managers almost from extinction. And what I mean by that is that what's become really apparent during the pandemic and after is that what employees are looking for are managers who are empathetic, agile, that are able to see them as human beings and adjust the way that they work with them to get the best outcomes. So in this kind of new world, managers need to become much better at understanding the individuals that work for them, what motivates them, how to craft their work in such a way that it's not just meaningful and has purpose, but that it can be delivered in sustainable ways that don't negatively impact things like mental health and burnout. So those are very human things that, thankfully the robots can't do yet. So yeah, absolutely. The role of managers has changed fundamentally since the pandemic.
Aaron, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
No worries. My pleasure.
That was Aaron McEwan, Vice President in the Gartner HR practice. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.